And welcome to this special meeting of the People Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to inform those that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. So, are any members in attendance as substitutes today? Yes.
Good afternoon,
Councillor Meadows, Councillor Ivan. Thank you, Councillor Meadows.
Councillor Meadows for Councillor Ivan Lines. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson for Councillor Millergate.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thompson. Okay. Do any members wish to declare any interest in relation to any matters included on the agenda? No? Okay. We have no Part 2 items today, so the press and public won't be excluded, and we have no public involvement today. And there are no members' questions. Chair's communications. Okay. Well, today we're here at this special meeting to scrutinise the draft plans of the 2026-27 budget, ahead of the budget going to Cabinet on the 12th of February and Budget Council on the 26th of February. The scrutiny team are in the process of arranging a joint special scrutiny committee meeting to allow us to scrutinise the final budget. This is planned for Monday, 16th of February, and details will be sent out to members shortly. So we will have a second opportunity for budget scrutiny, and obviously at that meeting we will be able to look at the last phase of the budget, which is the 13.5 million savings that are to be made. The minutes of this meeting and any specific comments or recommendations made by committee members will be shared with Cabinet to inform their planning. We are joined by Councillor Jacob Taylor, Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Finance and City Regeneration, and John Hooton, Interim Director of Property and Finance, who will be talking to us about the budget and then taking questions from members. We are also joined by Cabinet members and officers who are on hand to help with any questions specific to their service areas, and I'd like to welcome them to the meeting. We will start the meeting with an overview of the budget plans from Councillor Taylor. I will then ask each Cabinet member in turn, supported by Councillor Taylor and by the relevant officers, to briefly talk about their portfolios and then take questions. Although we only have one item on the agenda, the budget, this is an important subject for scrutiny, so I imagine there will be a lot of questions to get through. Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee is due to begin at 1700, and therefore we will need to finish this meeting by 16:30, and so we'll need to stick to timings to ensure the next meeting can start at the advertised time. Can I therefore please request that both those asking and answering questions are as brief and to the point as possible? In the interest of time and to ensure that everyone gets the chance to contribute, I'm going to ask members to refrain from asking multiple questions and to ask one question to each Cabinet member. If you have more questions for the Cabinet member, and if we have time, I will come back to you once everybody has had the opportunity. I need to be mindful that we have many service areas to cover and only limited time. I will move on to the next topic if I feel we need to, even if there are questions still to be asked. Please, can members keep to questions that will be relevant to the city rather than asking questions that are ward specific. These questions will be referred for a written answer after the meeting. Obviously, I do hope that people will have a chance to ask more than one question. It's just trying to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to say something here. I will look to hold a 10-minute break at an appropriate point, roughly halfway through the meeting. Also, I am aware that there may be kind of organic recommendations that develop out of the meeting, and so therefore, I will, that we finish at 4:30, allow 10 minutes if there's a need to put those into writing. So I now go to Councillor Shanks, who has a question for me.
Yes, it's two actually, but one is about why we've got two separate meetings. I know there's a lot to get through, but there's so much overlap, really, in people and place. And generally, if you look at models in other councils, you would have an overall scrutiny thing, and then you would have an individual scrutiny of a particular budget thing, perhaps on a smaller panel. So I don't think this is that productive a way of doing it because it's such a big topic. I mean, the other issue is when you say about ward councils, I mean, the whole reason, if you read the LGA's definition of what scrutiny is and why you do scrutiny, or how you do scrutiny, one of the things is to allow ward councillors to raise issues that are pertinent to their ward. So when you're saying don't make it, I get, yes, but if the library's closing in your ward, for example, then that's one of the reasons for having scrutiny, so that you get the ward councillors' input on individual issues. So yeah. Anyway, I get the time constraints, but this is very important. Can I just also ask whether that other scrutiny will be a joint one or whether it be two separate ones again?
I think I go to Giles for that.
I think the plan for the second meeting is that it will be a joint one because the focus will be narrower. The focus will be on what's additional in the final budget compared to the draft budget. Mm.
And with this one, there are actually quite a lot of things which are not covered by place. Very definitely not covered by place. So there are separations. The only area where I think we kind of join is probably housing, where we're dealing with homelessness, but they certainly don't deal with adult social care and children and so on. And so I hope that answers some of your question. And with the ward question, I think there were lots of opportunities when we've had scrutinies for people to ask ward questions. This is so much more than that. This is the budget, which covers a much wider area. And if there are questions that people have that are ward specific, I think they can probably do written questions for that. So I'm now going to go on, and Councillors Taylor and John Hooton, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, and taking your steer, Chair. I'll be relatively brief in giving an overview and introduction on the overall position, obviously to leave as much time as possible for questions and input and scrutiny. So, to recap where we are, on the 11th of December, Cabinet published a draft budget for the year 26-27, which is included in the papers for this meeting. In that budget paper, the council assumed a budget gap on its net general fund of £24.9 million for the year ahead, and so therefore that is the gap that needs to be closed as part of budget setting. I think it's worth explaining what that means in terms of budget gap and what it's made up of and what the drivers are, because and we discussed this at full council last time round about public interaction and understanding of budget. I think sometimes people hear a budget gap of £24.9 million and they might think, well, that means our funding's being cut by £24.9 million and therefore we've got to make up that shortfall. That isn't really what it means at all. So if I just turn committee to within that cabinet paper, that's obviously the papers for today's meeting, it's page 20 for me, and section 5.5, the table at section 5.5. That gives at a very high level the overall budget setting position for the net general fund next year. And what that shows is kind of interesting really, because it shows that our overall funding, and funding a local government is made up, as we know, of lots of different things. It's made up of business rates, council tax, it's made up of grants from government for specific things, and it's made up of income, fee income, from all sorts of things that the council provides. Our overall funding at the point of publishing this report in December suggested that our funding will go up £16.9 million on our general fund, which is interesting because not only is that a relatively chunky cash increase in terms of funding, but it's also more than the inflationary elements that we set out in the table. So in the table we say sort of normal inflation beyond service changes, so pay, prices, income, pensions, is going up by 9.6 million. And so that's more than our inflationary increase on our services. But then the main thing that comes in is the service pressures. And so the service pressures that we published at that point are £33.9 million, which is a very, very significant service pressure to the council. If you think of the net general fund as being sort of in the realms of 260, 280 million pounds, we're talking about service pressures beyond inflation of £34 million. And what are those pressures made up of? I know committee understands this well, but it's worth just reiterating. We have a couple of sources of very significant financial pressure on the council. The main one is homelessness and temporary accommodation. To give committee a sense of that, in the budget that we set last year and that we're working with in this financial year, the net general fund contribution of homelessness and temporary accommodation was about £8 million. In our pressures, we're forecasting that goes up by £12 million. So a net contribution of £8 million up to £20 million, which is the single biggest driver. But that gives you a sense of the scale of the pressure that is being responded to. I think it's also worth saying in that context of the overall funding, if we look back at funding in previous years, and as I say, the funding of council is made up of lots of different things. It's not always easy to compare your levels of funding, but the main thing you can compare is your net general fund. And officers have pulled together some data. I'm happy to share this in minutes with the committee if it's of interest. And looking at our net general fund from 2010 onwards, and what those figures show are that there were some really stark periods where it wasn't that our funding wasn't matching service pressures. Our funding was actually being cut in cash terms. It wasn't being cut in real terms, it was being cut in cash terms. So for instance, 2012, 2013, our net general fund went down £9.5 million. That's in cash terms. 2014 went down 2.8 million. 2015-16 went down 9.4 million. 2016 went down 11 million. So there were years on years where our actual funding was going down in cash terms against, of course, some normal inflationary pressure. What we have in the last 2 years is last year our overall general fund went up £18.4 million. And as I say, when we published this report, our assumption that was it would go up £16.9 million this year. So those are 2 out of the 3 largest increases in cash funding that this authority has seen since 2010. So I just wanted to put that into the context, and this is not me attempting to defend my Labour government at all, it's me attempting to explain that the authority's overall funding is going up quite significantly in cash terms, and it's going up in real terms versus the inflation that we face, and of course headline inflation, which is RPI, CPI, whatever it is at the moment, 3 or 4%. It's going up quite significantly beyond that. The problem that we've got are some specific service pressures that we can draw out in this meeting that obviously relate to primarily homelessness and TA, but also some pressures on cost and demand in adult social services, and to a lesser degree, a little bit in children's social services. So that's the position that we got to in December. We then published a draft budget that we've got in front of us that includes £12.4 million of mitigations or savings. And I think it's worth saying that the vast majority of those are not cuts to services, but are changes in service provision or mitigations to pressures or redesigns of elements of service to try and bring those inflationary and service pressures down. That leaves a remaining budget gap, as Councillor Quinn said in her introduction. So that left a remaining budget gap of £12.4 million. We've now had our final local government Settlement has changed a little bit. Some things benefited us, some things disbenefited us. So the overall gap has changed by, I think, about £900,000, and that's covered in the cover report. And so as Councillor Quinn says, we will now publish a further and final budget report. I think it will be published on something like the 4th of February in advance of Cabinet, and as Councillor Quinn has indicated, we'll then have a further scrutiny meeting on the 16th of February to look at all those residual budget proposals that have been published to get us to a position where we close the gap and have a balanced budget that is published. Last thing to say, and then I'll turn over to others, is to just to obviously signal that in Appendix 1 in the report, that shows the detail of the budget savings, and on page 375, so the first page of that appendix, that breaks it down by directorate. So of that £12.4 million that we published at draft, 1.2 comes from families, children and wellbeing, 7.4 comes from homes and adult social care, 1.6 comes from city operations, 2.1 comes from central hub, which is sort of central corporate services like finance, property, law, and HR, and that totals 12.4 million, which is the draft set proposals that we've published. With that, Chair, I'm happy to stop and hand over to Cabinet members to take through the detail of their areas.
Right, okay. I will do that now. So, yes. Yes, please do.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have those figures, obviously, as you do in front of you. It would be interesting to say those council tax figures, because I've got a feeling there was some time where the opposition froze the council tax, and therefore we lost out. Obviously, if you freeze it 1 year, you don't get much back. That was when we were in administration, so that was probably 2012 or 13. And obviously, new building helps council tax. It'd just be interesting to see those figures, really. So my main question is about the government funding and the fairness funding and whatever it's called now. But how does that, we have one of the biggest homeless populations in the country. So how come that we're not getting, finance for that out of this funding system? And how much have we missed out on that? Or,
So the answer to that, and this is me not deferring, is that it's complicated, and the changes that were made by this government are particularly complicated in the way they've changed some of the formula funding. The high-level answer is that and by the way, we haven't had our funding cut. Well, what's happened is our funding has not gone up as much as we had previously thought based on the previous settlement, and then looking forward to the MTFS as how much we think it might grow. So we're not having cuts in real terms, and as you say, part of that is made up of our base, our council tax and business rates base, that we get more money, as you say. I think last year we built the most houses in the city that's happened for well over a decade. It was 1,075 houses, of which most of those are not council, but obviously that increased the tax base. That's part of the reason why our funding is going up. In headline terms, what is happening with the Fair Funding Review is that councils are getting more funding that have the highest levels of deprivation. And there's a few different ways you can measure deprivation, but broadly speaking, Brighton and Hove is about in the middle when you look at local authorities across the country. We know that we have significant elements of deprivation in certain areas of the city, and then we have other parts of the city that are much less deprived. Overall, when you rank the local authorities, we're sort of in the middle, and so therefore we haven't had huge funding uplifts. There are local authorities, of which I know the leaders and deputy leaders, that have had increases in funding. So places like Bradford, which is one of the more deprived cities in the country, have had fairly chunky increases in funding. Now, as finance leader of this authority, I could say, "Oh, come on, government, just give us more and more money. We'd like some more money," and I would like some more money, and I am calling for that. But I also have to say it would be hypocritical of me, as a Labour politician, to say actually what the government have attempted to do in rebalancing funding to areas of severe deprivation is not the right thing to do. I think it is the right thing to do. I think it's in line with Labour values, and I think it's in line with acknowledging that there are areas of this country that have been significantly left behind by the policies of the 1980s and then austerity, and this is a way of trying to bring those areas back up to the funding they need. But overall, it's mainly about the deprivation measures that are meaning we're not getting big upticks in funding. Now, on homelessness, That's obviously important as well. I think the way homelessness is being calculated hasn't hugely benefited us. If we did it purely on claimant numbers, we'd probably do better. If it's just done on, when I say claimant, I mean people presenting as homelessness, we would have a high number. If it's done more on universal credit, we do less well because we don't have as many universal credit claimants. I do think that there is something about the government could give us some more flexibility, to be honest. I think if you look at our overall pressures, we've effectively got a pressure of short-term, we hope, demand for temporary accommodation and families presenting as homeless, which I think we can fix with various measures, not least expanding the programme that we've already announced of buying as many houses as possible and bringing them into either social long-term tenancies or temporary accommodation. If we can do that quicker and faster, we'll tackle this short-term problem much quicker. And so if we had more flexibility in the way that we could use capital, the way that we could borrow to do those transactions, I think we could do it quicker. And that is something that I'll be making representations to government about.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. I'm going to move on now to Councillor Emma Daniel and the Children's, Families and Youth Services portfolio. Councillor Daniels, do you want to say a few words before questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to join remotely. Keep my germs away from everybody. I really appreciate that. So members might look at the savings proposed from my area of budget and think, given the gaps around and what we're trying to achieve, they seem quite low. But I think that reflects the fact that this administration and myself and all my colleagues on the cabinet are incredibly focused on children and young people and ensuring that children and young people do not face the level of problems that they shouldn't suffer from any kind of pressure on their funding where we can avoid it. So what have we done? The 1.2 million savings are basically reflecting our way of working over the last few years, which is a gradual shift of the work that we do in children's and youth services from crisis to prevention end. And that shift has to be gradual if it's to be effective and not cause increased costs in crisis care, so emergency placements. You cannot turn a ship that's facing crisis to a ship that's facing proactive early intervention fast, because if you do that, children's lives are caught in the middle. So that's one of the reasons why we're being so careful about those reductions. And the high quality of that work is reflected in the fact that we have at the moment a 0% of our social workers are agencies against a national statistic of an average of 16% of their social workers being at an agency, which is not only bad for and expensive for budget, but it's also bad and expensive for children's lives and outcomes. So the savings proposed include a greater contribution of public health funding and dedicated schools grant to work that was previously funded by the general fund. One of the changes I'm most proud about is that we've now established the mental health counselling in schools as a permanent budget line being funded by public health, so moving it from pilot into a more secure and ongoing provision, which is what young people have told us they want, and that is their priority, and so that is our priority. There are small savings in unused budgets, so those are just being reduced to reflect the reality. And then we also have increased funding from government, and we've gone from a government that's changed from one which had absolute violent indifference to young people to one that's properly investing in young people. So that means that not only are we able to protect the youth services that we had in place in the city anyway, but we're also going to be able to grow those youth services. And then there are some other savings that are around contract management and around change programs coming to an end. So, for example, there's a reduction to stonewater in violence against women and girls, but that's because a change program was underway and that's now finished. And then there's a small reduction in need in home to school transport. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daniel. So who do I have questions from? Right, TJ, Meadows, Shanks, and at the end. Any from this side? Okay. I'm going to kick off then, please, with TJ, Councillor Sheard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Daniel, for that statement. It's quite interesting to get a look behind the curtain and see what you're talking about, and as always, very insightful. As you mentioned in your statement there, a lot of the budget savings that are proposed for your department are coming from unused budgets, underused and underutilised budgets. Things like the reduction of staff on the FDFF, and the reduction in home to school transport. I was just wondering, if this is a dip in demand, are you certain that this is a permanent dip in demand for these services? And if these demands either surge again or predictions of dips in demand, such as in home to school transport, don't come to fruition, how much of a margin for error is there on these budgets?
Thank you, Councillor Sheard. Yeah, so on the front door for families, I am confident that that's achievable, because at the moment we're going through a Families First change programme, which, if needed, Deb can explain a bit more. But that is about what I was talking about shifting our provision from intervening at crisis to intervening at the earliest possible opportunity. And therefore, we do feel that that is a sustained change, and that we will be able to, in the medium term, provide further sustained reductions in staffing. That's the point of that kind of whole transformation programme. In terms of home to school transport, yes, I'm relatively confident about that reduction. We know what children we have in our cohorts, and we also know going forward that we have, as we have had these conversations around schools, we also know that the number of children in the city is dropping over time. That's something we'd love to change in the fullness of time, but at the moment that's the reality. So yeah, I think both of those are achievable.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I now go to Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the paperwork. I feel it's rather an early piece of paperwork, because a lot of the dates are out of date, if you see what I mean, because it talks about the mayoral elections this year. Just going into the school's balances, it talks about the council has a duty to scrutinise whether any school holds surplus balances. Well, we know that a number do, and some of them hold balances that are over £100,000. I understand there are plans in place for them to pay that back, but they're quite tight plans over 3 to 5 years. So I wonder how that fits in with, on page 14, under item 4.1, the second bullet point. It talks about the extension of the current override for deficits on dedicated schools grant, and the announcement that the government does not expect local authorities to continue to fund deficits. If that's only 2 years' time, that's going to be a very, very tight timescale for some schools to enable them to pay back any deficit. I just wonder what support would be in place for those schools, as I believe that's about 50% of our schools are in deficit of some kind or another, and that's a lot of funding does it mean they could go to academies? Thank you.
Chair, I'm happy to come in on that one because in my portfolio I cover school finance and school organisations. So thank you for that question, Councillor Meadows. There's a few different things that are not being conflated but that are being talked about at the same time there. So the point on the government override was specifically relates to the high needs block and for SEND deficits. The government absolutely have not said all school deficits can be overridden or written off as specific to high needs block and SEND. In this city, we haven't historically had and when I say historically, in the last couple of years, had a big problem with huge SEND deficits in the way that some other authorities have. So, for instance, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole have got a huge number on their SEND deficit, 70 or 80 million or something like that. And there has been an override in place. That isn't hugely relevant to this authority because we haven't really been in that position. As Councillor Meadows says, what we have got in this city is a number of schools that are in budget deficit position. It's fairly highly correlated with the fall in pupil numbers, which is that we know that, and we're talking about this at full council next week, various proposals to reduce PAN or merge to an infant and a junior school. At the point of next year, we're going to have about 25% capacity in our primary school network in terms of spare places. That's a big driver. It's the biggest single driver of the overall deficits of primary schools. But we are taking lots of action as a local authority to mitigate that, some of which has been the more difficult things about we had to close a couple of schools and reducing the PANs, but it's also about getting schools to work together, to federate, to change their overall structure, to make their budgets more sustainable if they need to be. In terms of the deficit point, there's a whole scheme that's in place for school budgets whereby schools can request a deficit. We would prefer them to request a deficit and then be able to get into balance the following year, but they can have it up to 3 years and then up to 5 years in exceptional circumstances if agreed. I want to be clear that as a council, we very much oversee those budgets and we push schools and we also help schools and guide schools to get into more financially sustainable position, but it is also difficult given the overall pupil numbers position. But on the deficits, there's no sort of override that's relevant to the general school deficits, and we have our ongoing process of allowing deficits as long as there's the right level of control and scrutiny and that there's a plan to pay them back.
Thank you. Teresa, I can't go to you because I've got other people with questions, but I'll put you down on the list. Okay, thank you very much. I now go to Councillor Shanks.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't expecting to be next. A couple of things. One is public health funding, and I've put in a recommendation about this because I used to be a bit more involved than I am now in public health funding, and I was always being told when I wanted to use it for something else that there's a public health grant, that it's ring-fenced, it can only be used for this and this and this. So I would like to see a breakdown of that sometime and how much it is, because it's being used to prop up services and, So, whether it's a good thing to put it in public health, and I can understand why we use mental health in public health, but I think my other concern was around the adolescent service, which should be a priority for us really in terms of young people moving in adolescence, and you're taking the post away there. You're also using some of the Young Futures funding, and that funding has been given to local authorities to create youth-led spaces, which I'm very excited about because I like that sort of stuff. So I don't really see how we can use it for propping up other services at the moment. I think that's the question.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's more than one question, but okay, fine. So Emma, do you want to answer that?
That was 3 different questions, really, wasn't
it?
So I'll try and address the ones that I feel confident to address. First of all, I absolutely think that young people's mental health is public health, and I will allow Jacob to talk a bit more about that part specifically. I agree that adolescence is a real priority. My priority for the coming year is actually more around looking at placements for complex adolescents, because I think our service is really good, but but nationally, I think there's really not the best. I don't have brilliant confidence in the care that's available for adolescents, and I'd really like us to focus in on that this year, as well as keeping that eye on that the very earliest intervention, because that is the best place to intervene. Which brings us on to Young Futures funding. I think that it's absolutely what we did was bridge the position and kept youth services going in the city where even where they're non-statutory, even when there was a lot of pressure to cut youth budgets to keep other statutory services going. And I don't think we should apologize for that. I think that was the right thing to do. We did that last year, and because of that, and because of this city's commitment to young people, that's why we've been chosen as a pilot area, and I'm really proud of that. So I think that the Young Futures money comes in at the right time for us. What it does is enables the work that was going on to be refocused into 3 priority areas, and that is young people's well-being, employability, and preventing crime. And those are our shared ambitions for our young people too. So we will absolutely be delivering on those aims using that funding, and I think it's absolutely right to use it for what we want to use it for. Those are shared priorities. What it means is you don't lose experienced staff and experienced personnel unnecessarily, but they will be switching to delivering on that vision. I think that makes sense. I think Jacob may be on the public health chair.
Well, thank you. Just briefly on public health. So, I mean, as you say, it's a ring-fence grant. It has to go towards the provision of public health. But how you do that, my understanding sort of varies quite greatly between local authorities. Lots of different ways you could try to promote public health, and of which mental health is an important part of it. I think in the past, perhaps there has been a view as no, public health is totally separate consideration and nothing to do with either budget setting or scrutiny from councillors. But I think, to your point, Councillor Shanks, maybe it would be worth at that next scrutiny meeting do a specific item on public health. There's not really many proposals in this budget other than utilising some small part of it within this service area, but maybe we look at public health as a sort of part of that future scrutiny meeting. The details, how the fund can be used, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Yeah, I sort of remember from last year there was quite a lot of money that went from public health, so it might be a good idea to have a look at that area and scrutinise it more carefully. So thank you. I'm now going to go to Joe. Joe, you have a question?
Oh, hello, and thank you for the presentation and the investment in young people, and it's particularly brilliant, the Young Futures stuff. That's something we haven't had for a while. Following on from the public health questions, just a straight question, what are we losing in public health to spend in these areas?
Thank you, Joe.
I can come in on that one. We're not losing anything. This is from an underspend on the public health grant for 25-26. So it's not a reduction of service in public health. It's money that is part of the ring fence grant that can be spent according to the grant criteria on these activities. Thank you.
And does that mean it's then recurrent funding?
Joe, you might.
The papers are clear, this is one-off funding, so we would then be, what we're doing currently is looking at what that budget looks like going forward in order to secure the funding.
Thank you. Just to add on to that, I'm just wondering where the underspend was in public health.
I don't have that information to hand.
It might be helpful to have
I
that.
can hear there's a suggestion about looking at that in more detail, so that could be covered off there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now I go to Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Less of a question.
I hope you'll forgive me more of a reflection on the budget here with regards to families, children, wellbeing, youth services. I'd like to express a broader point about how community and voluntary sector has felt included in processes as a strategic partner. There are an incredible number of collaborative projects, including Families First agendas, Best Start agendas, new youth work buildings across the city, close partnership links with adolescent services doing sophisticated joined-up safeguarding work. We've been collaborating with the local authority on a £500,000 lottery bid we're hoping to hear from any minute to help implement plans around developing us as a new city of youth social action. We have also been treated as critical collaborators on the national government's new Young Futures Hubs programme, which is set to grow the local youth services offer to help meet the city's statutory duty to provide youth work. It's more clear than ever that we're working closely together, pulling in the same direction towards improving outcomes for the city's children and young people. So the opportunity I was taking with my 2 minutes was to say thank you to Deb and her entire team for the hard work. It's really reflected that we're being supported as a voluntary sector in these processes at large, and thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for that. I don't know if Emma wishes to comment on that.
I do. I think that I just want to say that I know that through the last decade, Adam and Joe have both, kept the flame of why youth work is so important and that community sector collaboration alive. Oftentimes, I know it's not because of a lack of will from officers or members of any party, but just because of the amount of cuts to budgets in previous years. It's been really difficult, and it's been a lot of energy and personal responsibility that they've taken, and it hasn't always been easy. And they should feel that both of them should feel incredibly proud of themselves for keeping that going, and that has allowed us to have that firm foundation that now we can finally fly.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. Yes, and I think the contributions you've made at Scrutiny, we're all impressed with your passion in this particular area and continued passion and support for young people, and which I think is brilliant. And I think we would all agree with that. And I'm delighted that you've been able to work so closely with officers and members of the council on this area. And I'm now going to go to Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. Emma and Jacob, and I wanted to talk to what on paper looks like a small reduction, the 40k saving to renegotiate contracts for services for children with disabilities to achieve efficiencies and improvements for money. The short break holiday programme is mentioned, and direct payments are mentioned. I wanted to add some context for the purpose of what I'm going to say today. It's adding some broader context and also a request for a bit of a query as to whether the £100,000 that the Labour administration added to the short breaks budget in the financial year that we're in now, whether half of that will still be carried over to the next financial year, as was the intention. I also want to say that PAC fully support the ethos of having a send short breaks holiday programme, but in talking about this budget line, we've really got to realise the pressures within providing sufficient short breaks for this cohort. I also recognise that the Labour group made a big and aspirational and positive statement about prioritising social opportunities for children and young people with SEND within this programme. Feedback that comes through PAC is we have desperate families reaching out to us saying that, and I'm citing the summer of 2025 here, that just one short break session was available to their families, whereas previously in the summer of 2024 they had received more sessions. The stats provided by the commissioning team showed that on average 107 children and young people accessed 3.24 specialist sessions in the summer holidays, but Brighton and Hove also acknowledged that some families accessed fewer than this average number of sessions. We don't actually have that figure. I just wanted to draw a comparison to the contrast with a half holiday programme, where in documentations from the council, eligible children and young people are encouraged to attend multiple sessions, and half states that evidence shows that repeated attendance is where the greatest impact on character development, including self-confidence and resilience, can be achieved. Now, when you're looking at children and young people with areas of need across SEND, which greatly vary in an individual's support needs, we do know that many children and young people require one-to-one or two-to-one support around the clock in homes, in short break settings. And what we're really highlighting here, and I want to broaden it out a little bit because some councillors or some people working within the council may think, oh, well, families can use their direct payments to access support, but we know that there's an issue, a significant and persistent issue around recruiting PAs, because there aren't PAs within the city, and I recognise that that's also a issue nationally. So really, in summing up, there's a query around that because it was really recognised that 100k investment was looking to offer more support. So it's a query about whether that's been carried over. But then having a 40k saving would then, to me, show concerns that actually it sort of wipes out the 50k investment carried forward. But the general line is a real plea for decision makers when it comes to budget setting to look at equity SEND holiday provision and how this can be achieved, because the position is not equitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. Councillor Davis, would you like to answer that?
Councillor Daniel.
Sorry, Daniel. Why don't you do
Oh, yeah, I was a bit
Councillor Daniel.
confused then.
Yeah, no, I know.
Thank you, Chair.
Apologies. Apologies.
Oh, who's that? Okay, so I think, I'm grateful for Fiona for raising this. This plan saving is purely about a reduction that is not about a reduction in hours or offer. It is about a contract management point of view. So to be clear, that should be a saving that's not, and what I've been briefed on is that is not about a reduction in service. But all her wider points, are fair, I think. And I think the complicated thing when we talk about short breaks or social opportunities for disabled children during the holidays, they're two different things technically, but they might be the same session in practice. Is that disabled children obviously have different disabilities and have different experiences of the short break offer, and families therefore have different experiences of the short break offer. And my understanding, and whilst I've tried very hard to make progress on this, is that there is a small cohort of parents of children with the maybe what you call the most complex disabilities who require 2-to-1 support, who feel that the offer isn't working for them and continue to, and from what Fiona said now, continue to feel that way despite quite a lot of focus and time and extra investment. We spend, just for context, we spend £1.1 million per year more on short breaks as a concept, like the whole of short breaks, not just these summer holiday sessions that we're talking about, than our statistical neighbours. So we are a high spender generally in terms of short breaks, but we, and I think we haven't got it right. we continue to work on that, and I commit to continue to working with PAC on that. I don't know if Deb wants to add anything specific now, but hopefully my commitment to continue to work with PAC on this issue, acknowledging that there are some families for whom this hasn't worked and continues to be problematic, it responds to the direct question.
I think just on that, the specific funding point, my understanding is that is going to be carried forward and available, but we'll obviously confirm in writing, but that was my understanding, yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Daniel. Thanks, Councillor Taylor, for that. I just also wanted to add another useful bit of context, because I noted, Councillor Daniel, that you talked about early intervention across the directorate, and how much PAC very much welcome, a focus on early intervention. That's incredibly important. We know that early intervention comes across many different stages of a child and young person's life, 0 to 25. But I did really want to also promote that actually I think it's useful for our thinking that a short break for a child or a young person should be seen as part of an early intervention programme, because they're not stuck at home with their families struggling to cope. So I just thought that's quite useful context for a direction of travel of thinking that the directorate are looking at. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I'm now going to go to Teresa. Teresa, Mackie, your question.
I was just going to talk about the deficits as well in the school's budgets. And that's against the backdrop of increasing staff salaries. And I'm concerned about the impact it's having on the curriculum coverage, the pastoral support. And we know as the money is following pupil numbers, we've got reduced pupil numbers. So we're going to have a contracted curriculum and contracted expertise amongst our schools and our teaching staff, and a reduction of teaching assistants to support adequately children with identified special educational needs or disabilities. I just wondered what specifically is being done to support the schools in managing those deficits. And it has been said that there's going to be engagement with the schools forum over this in January, and I was going to ask, has that taken place?
Thank you. Councillor Daniel, do you want to?
You might still on.
So I'll come in on that. That's okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McKay. So a couple of things to say. So as you draw out, it's a difficult argument to make, but obviously we've been through this as a city, and as I mentioned earlier, we ended up having to close 2 schools, and then the Catholic Diocese closed one of their own schools optionally. It's a difficult argument to make, but I believe it to be true, which is that it's actually not progressive to have half-empty schools. It's actually regressive in my mind to have half-empty schools, given the current overall way that schools are funded. And by the way, I understand that in most systems in the world, yes, there is some link between numbers of pupils and funding. And so what happens is, if you've got schools that are half empty and they've got to try to balance their budgets, typically head teachers and governing bodies don't have that many levers, but one lever they do have is to reduce availability of TA, availability of special support. So actually, you'd be better off with a system where you've got fewer schools that are more full. That would mean that the budgets are more sustainable and that more support is able to be provided. And that's why we reached the difficult decision we did in closing some schools and also reducing PANs. I realise that's a very painful process to go through, and painful for families and the schools that have been there and have a unique history and a unique contribution. But overall, the consequence of that policy is that some of those nearby schools are indeed now much fuller and are able to protect their budgets a bit better. However, that's obviously not the only lever, and as you say, what other support the council is providing. The council has been actually trying to proactively increase the availability of support and challenge to schools. You know, I'd say in seeing schools and meeting many schools that I have, there's probably sort of varying degrees of in-house expertise at looking at way to manage budgets, and so we're trying to help with that and provide that support so that they can set sustainable budgets. In terms of school forum, it's actually today at 4:00 in between these meetings. So yeah, there is a school forum today that obviously officers will be presenting at. And then last thing to say, that I touched upon it earlier, there's other things to look at as well within the mix on school organisation, of which school partnership, which could come in a few different forms, is one of them. There are ongoing conversations about potential federations or potential partnership working within our family of schools to help with those budget challenges, but also help sharing other types of resources, expertise on how to do inventions, how to do curriculum, etc. And to answer the point from Councillor Meadows that I forgot to answer, that is also about defending the city system against more academisation. We don't believe that it's right that the system will further splinter into more academies and some local authority. I think it's actually better to have schools within the local authority, a family, and we are putting together an offer of support, but also a broader offer on a school improvement that will be coming forward in the coming months about how do we beef up the support for school improvement so they don't feel they need to become academies.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Yeah, Teresa, I'm going to have
Can
to...
I just add something?
Okay. Councillor Daniel, but then I won't be able to carry on, Teresa, because we're running out of time on this one. Councillor Daniel.
I just wanted to say we are being as creative as we can as well from a wider children's services perspective. So we as you may remember from last year, we have actually put alternative provision in many schools, and the offer we put into Rudyard Kipling, for example, has meant that there are specialists working in the AP program within that school who have been able to share capacity within the school. So, for example, they assessed the speech and language needs of the reception class and devised a learning plan for that class teacher to be able to put into place. So that's an example of how, by housing another service within the schools, we've been able to increase the capacity and early intervention. I hope that's helpful as an example, but I'm really proud of that one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daniel. And I now go to Ellen McClay. And this will be the last question on this because we must move on to adult social care.
Thank you. And glad to hear that there'll be follow-up scrutiny on these papers. I was quite concerned that we were being quite limited in this meeting. So the direct school grant statutory override on overspend continues into financial year 27-28. And if we're shifting spend from the general fund to the direct school grant, I'm wondering if this is a wise decision.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel or Councillor Taylor?
I mean, so generally speaking, there's not a huge shift of overall general fund until DSG. There's a couple of items, but it's not like we're shifting millions of pounds of general fund into DSG. I think more significantly, and I'll apologise if I've got this wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the override piece is only on the high needs block and the send piece. There's no overrides for general school deficit, so I don't think that sort of causes a problem in the way that Councillor McClay is suggesting and drawing out.
Okay. Thank you. I'm now going to move on. Thank you very much, Councillor Daniel. Oh, yes.
Yeah, if I can just come in,
Yeah.
if you've been on that. Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, it's moving into the early years element of the designated school grant, which is completely separate to the grant that funds our primary and high schools. So we get funding in separate blocks, and the saving that's being proposed, the £24,000 saving, relates specifically to early years block as opposed to the block that funds schools. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Daniel. And also thank you to Deb Austin for being here and answering questions. So now we will invite Councillor Alexander to join us for the Communities, Equalities, Public Health and Adult Social Care portfolio. So, Michi, hello. And of course, Steve Hook. Good to see you.
Hello, everyone. So adult social care is the largest general budget in the council and forms over 40% of the net general fund budget. Adult social care continues to experience significant and sustained pressure driven by rising demand, increasing complexity of need and market fragility. In spite of inflation uplifts applied to the council's overall budget and therefore the adult social care budget, we foresee demand-led service pressures continuing to rise. These service pressures are estimated to be just over £9 million. About £6 million is related to demand and £3 million related to the cost of demand. As a commissioning organisation, we have benchmarked our provider costs across the South East and found that in some areas of care provision, we pay a higher price for care than elsewhere in the region. Additionally, adult social care was inspected by the Care Quality Commission last year. Inspectors recognised committed staff and strong partnership work, but also identified areas for improvement, such as improving the prevention offer, reducing wait times for assessment, increasing the number of annual reviews, and reducing the number of people that we place into residential care. Our budget setting proposals seek to address the service pressures and proposed savings and mitigations amount to about £10 million. These proposals support our improvement journey in terms of quality, safety, and statutory compliance. The proposals include increasing access to enablement services, as well as speeding up assessments at the front door to support prevention and early intervention. In terms of managing the market, we will be taking a targeted approach to provider uplifts in the contract prices as we did this year. We guaranteed inflation uplifts for providers in sectors such as home care, and took a case-by-case approach to uplifts for providers of residential care. In future years, 27-28 onwards, we have identified service pressures based on an expectation that our new way of working will reduce new demand, and over time we will see a reduction in the benchmarked price differential between local authorities. Adult social care is committed to delivering safe, high quality, person-centred support while ensuring long-term financial sustainability. These proposals balance our statutory duties with our improvement ambitions and our responsibility to manage public money wisely. The proposals that we've set out in our budget strengthens early intervention, boosts prevention, ensures value for money, and supports the continued improvement journey following last year's CQC inspection. And I'm joined by Steve Hook here, who will help me answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. And can I just make a point before we go into questions, is that next week we will actually be looking at adult social care. It's one of the items on our agenda. So we'll be able to ask a lot more questions again at that point. And that is, of course, before we come to budget again on the 16th. And don't forget, we have the final budget meeting later on in February. So there will be lots of opportunity, and I think particularly next week, to get our teeth well and truly stuck into this. But today, let's see who's got questions. Right, I've got TJ, and I've got Sam, and I've got Alison, and Sarah, of course, and Jo, and Fiona. Right, so pretty much I thought this one, that's why I've said lots more next week as well. I agree, it's a very, very important issue, and lots of pressures in it. So I'm going to start off with TJ.
Thank you, Chair. In the budget, you've laid out, similar vein to what I asked Councillor Daniel, Councillor Alexander, you lay out about an £880,000 saving through the reablement scheme. So firstly, is this savings made on the reablement service or on the assumed savings the reablement service will have on preventing people from entering the rider case network? And secondly, if it is the latter, what makes your team so confident that these, let's be honest, quite decent savings can be realised without expansion to the team? And what is the margin for error if this saving isn't realised throughout the year?
I'll go to Steve to answer that.
Yeah, it's quite technical.
Thanks very much for your question. In terms of our reablement saving, yes, we've set a target of 888,000 for the year, which is quite an ambitious target. We currently deliver some reablement services that have given us a good degree of success. So in one of our care homes for older people, Craven Vale, we have 14 reablement beds that have delivered about £250,000 worth of savings so far. And we've also increased our reablement facility at Arnon Lodge, which is our older people's facility for older people with dementia. Those 6 beds mobilised from September and have so far delivered £29,000 worth of savings in this financial year. So with a relatively small reablement offer, we've delivered some significant savings already. In terms of how those savings are calculated and reached, you're quite right. It's in terms of the predictions around the kind of support that people will need ongoing after a period of reablement will mean much more that they can return home with lower levels of care than perhaps they would have done had they not been through reablement. And there's a two-pronged approach to this. One focus around our reablement is around things like hospital discharge. Many of our patients that come out of hospital go through Craven Vale and now Arnon Lodge for that period of reablement, and we have therapists employed at those sites to support our support staff with that. But we are also looking at developing a reablement offer in our front door. So when people come to our access point for adult social care, there currently isn't an offer of reablement. People are screened for whether they have Care Act needs or not, and then are either they go on a waiting list or they are given information and advice accordingly. Where authorities are successful in delivering a reablement programme, they do tend to have a multi-pronged offer around reablement. So people that come to the front door for adult social care, we would want to offer them a reablement package before they come in and have a full assessment, because sometimes you can deliver reablement support without having to have a full Care Act needs assessment. In terms of the programme, there has been an investment in making this work. So we've employed a really experienced programme manager who has worked on reablement projects with great success in London and other areas of the country, who's working with us for a year on our reablement offer. We'll be doing lots of that work around reablement also in conjunction with colleagues across the NHS, because you can't deliver a good reablement offer without it being clinically led and therapy led. So the savings are predicated around cost avoidance and reducing the ongoing cost of care. There's a good evidence-based model for demonstrating that, and that's why we've got quite an ambitious target.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes,
And just very quickly, because I think it's a good challenge from Councillor Shid, which is essentially, are we being too ambitious in attempting to mitigate things in the budget, and does that leave you open to risk in year? The answer is somewhat yes, because obviously when you're facing these pressures, both on the homelessness piece that we talked about a bit, and then on the adult social care side, you've sort of got a couple of options, haven't you? You could just accept those pressures and then cut non-statutory services, and it's probably more deliverable to just cut non-statutory services, close the toilets or close nurseries, but we were trying to avoid doing exactly that. So the starting point for budget setting has been, what can we do to reduce costs and mitigate pressure within those service areas whilst maintaining the overall offer of most of the services the council provides, and that's obviously what the team are working for. If we look at this year, one of the things that we did in the budget we passed is we did put in a risk provision, because we knew that some of those things are difficult to do and are not absolutely guaranteed. So building up the overall reserves of the council and putting in risk provision is a way of also trying to manage the sort of risk that Councillor Sheard is pointing to.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Thank you for your question, Councillor Sheard or TJ. Right, I am now going to go to Joe. I'll move from side to side. Joe, would you like to ask your question? Okay, it's fine, Sarah. I got you down as well. I'm sorry, I thought Joe did. So, Joe, would you like to? Sorry, Sarah, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. That's it. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for a bit more detail, because it felt like these are strategies that have actually been around for a very long time in adult social care, and we've still seen year-on-year cuts, including for some of the independence at home services. Sort of speaking for the Older People's Council, obviously, about 60% of adult social care users are older people, and so you can see there's likely to be a disproportionate effect. And I'm sceptical, I guess, about how can you make that level of savings when there's been year-on-year cut without a negative impact to older people. I know you've tried to explain that, but when we have a equalities impact assessment that acknowledges that carers, older people and people with disabilities are likely to be most affected by any savings in adult social care, how can we have an impact that measures at one? I mean, I think that the impact assessment needs looking at again, and with what can actually happen to mitigate any effect on older people. I'm here to represent other people with protected characteristics. So it feels like there will be disproportionate impact on any more savings in adult social care. And as I say, I acknowledge the difficulties that you've got, but it seemed to, we've seen year on year savings having to be made on adult social care, and we already know that requires improvement from the CQC in many areas for that. And I'm pleased that the Cabinet has got what was it called? An incredibly focused on children and young people. Obviously, I'm pleased about that, but I would like to see be assured of a similar focus on other people with vulnerabilities and protected characteristics. So I'm asking more detail on how that level of savings can be achieved, and for the equalities impact assessments and mitigating factors to really be revisited and have more detail. There's a whole list of no, people won't be affected.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. I'm sure we'll have an answer today, but I think probably you'll get more answers next week as well. So, Sarah, can you? Thank you, Sarah.
I'll say a couple of words and pass over to Steve, but the savings in the adult social care department are savings rather than cuts. It's how we can save money by actually giving a better service, but I'm sure Steve can explain.
Can I just We'll go into Steve, and I know this sometimes sounds like semantics, but I think it's really important to draw it out that I know as you change services every year, you might feel like there's an attention on adult social care and that there's savings or cuts. I think we've got to be really clear that actually there hasn't been cuts to adult social care funding over the last 10 years. Indeed, there has been exponential growth in the spend on adult social care over the last few years. I mean, I've got some data in front of me from one of the sets of papers that if you just look at the community care budget within adult social care, in 2017 we were spending about £53 million, and we're currently spending just over £85 million. So in a very short period, the amount of funding that's going to adult social care has risen very, very, very sharply. And as Mitchie says, and as Steve has tried to draw out, what we're trying to do in the budget is not cut overall service provision, but to say, look, we're facing these cost pressures. How do you continue to provide the service but at a lower cost? But I think we should be clear as a council and as a city, funding for adult social care has gone up very, very significantly over the last 10 years, probably more so than any other budget of the council. Steve, is there anything you wanted to say in the sort of substance as far as...
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. So, Sarah, in terms of your query and your question around the quality impact assessment, I mean, what the assessment says broadly is that there are no identified negative disproportionate impacts for these groups. And we recognise there will be some impacts for these groups. But just to clarify, for our savings plan for this year, we are not disinvesting in any of our in-house services. Our approach around prevention is really approach around investment. So we've invested in the programme manager to help work on our prevention pathway. We've also had significant investment into our kind of proactive reviewing capacity so that we can provide more proactive reviews for people. And we're also in discussions with colleagues in public health around things like the Ageing Well contract, which is currently available for people across the city, but we want to focus much more around our front door and access prevention. So I think in terms of the offer around reablement, I think it probably is fair to reflect over the last 6 or 7 years, we have through necessity had to remove some of our preventive services. But I think the focus around our savings for this year are around a couple of things. In terms of our reablement programme, in terms of some additional work we're doing around alternatives to telecare, and in terms of an investment around our reviewing capacity, there's been quite a significant investment of around about £700,000 of transformation money. We're also looking, as I said, to work with public health in a more proactive way around our Ageing Well contract and provide that support at the front door. So we're not cutting services for older people in terms of our prevention offer this year. We're really trying to invest in services differently so that we get to people quicker and prevent them needing higher levels of care.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am now going to go to Sam Parrott, Councillor Parrott, with your question.
Thank you. I guess my questions were very similar to some of the questions that have already been asked, and I understand we're going to go into some more detail. So I'll just keep it quite brief, really. I just wondered where we see, re-enablement and a project to move towards more preventative culture. I just wonder where we see the kind of key sources of friction in delivering that in terms of, we're only one part of that. So our ability to actually deliver that, it really does depend on our partnerships with SCFT, SPFT, our other partners, and our VCSE community as well. I just wonder where we see the kind of key areas. And I'm just curious about how we are monitoring that and whether we're using kind of, RAD systems, RAID logs, those kinds of standard monitoring systems that would be useful maybe, at some point to bring for us to have a closer look at, as well as I'd like to reiterate that I agree with all the other questions that have been asked.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. So in terms of, I guess, some more of the technical details around how we're investing in a preventive culture, you're quite correct in that this relies on partnerships with lots of our colleagues across the NHS, both in the Integrated Care Board, but also in the provider trust that we work with. So just giving you some examples, in our acute hospital, so we're doing some work with the University Hospital Sussex at the county hospital. We've got an admissions prevention team there that has, since July 23, when it started, diverted over 3,000 patients away from what would have been an A&E admission and then a hospital admission. We're also doing work with, and that's in partnership with such as Community Trust. So we have therapists, community nurses and social workers working in the front door of A&E to prevent those avoidable admissions and then divert people back into community services. And those people would otherwise have got into A&E and stood a strong chance of hospital admission. In terms of other work we're doing, we currently have an underspend in our disabled facilities grant, which is funded through the Better Care Fund. We've recently, given that we've joined up into a single directorate between homes and adult social care, we've moved our housing OT service across to sit in our front door with our adult social care OT service. And so we're looking to improve the numbers of minor and major adaptations that we can do as part of our front door, which will again prevent people having to come into adult social care and wait for an assessment. The other thing that we are doing is we are undertaking a review of our Better Care Fund spend across the piece with colleagues in the Integrated Care Board. So I think we're trying to match the resources that we've got with the approach that we've got. As I've said before, the programme manager that we've appointed, she will be working with our acute hospital, with our community provider trusts, and with our own in-house services to make sure that we have that reopenment pathway as part of our core offer. Because at the moment it's an add-on, and what we need to do is integrate that work into the day-to-day business of the department. But that's why we're relatively confident we'll be able to deliver a lot more around cost avoidance around reopenment than we do already.
Thank you very much, Steve. Now I'm going to move on to other people. If we're going to finish on time, we've literally really got like 15, maybe 20 minutes, because we've still got 3 people after that who admittedly have, smaller briefs for this. So I'm now going to move to Councillor Meadows. So shorter, maybe questions and shorter answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just reading the paper, and I'm sure there's only one item for adult social care in here, so we're all going to be asking a similar question. I was interested in Brickfield, because that used to be Knoll House, which was reablement for older people. 2 quick questions. One is, do we make any money by changing it from Knoll House, demolishing it, rebuilding it, and will we make any money from that rather than savings? And the other one is, you talked about increasing at Island Lodge, but Island Lodge, half of it has now been taken over with children's services. So I'm just wondering how you're increasing the entire number when you've got rid of Knoll House and half of Island Lodge is now with children's services.
Thank you, Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Councillor Meadows. In terms of Brickfields, you're right, that's the old Knoll House site that got decommissioned some years ago. And did actually leave a bit of a hole in our system around reablement and rehabilitation. Brickfields will do a whole number of things, though, in terms of delivering us efficiencies, but also improving lives of people with disabilities in the city. So Brickfields is obviously reopening as a supported living unit. So rather than being a care home, it's going to have 28 flats. And those flats will be focused around supporting working age adults with disabilities to lead more independent lives. Now, in terms of our CQC performance, we are currently an outlier as a city in placing a lot of young people in registered residential care. And so Brickfields will do a few things. We are aiming to resettle working age people that are currently in expensive residential care placements and resettle them into Brickfields. In particular, we have a very expensive service in the city that supports 12 people in the independent sector. Resettling those individuals into Brickfields will deliver some significant savings. This year, we've only set 300,000 against those savings for Brickfields because it will be a part-year effect because the unit won't open until midway through the year. But Brickfield should see a significant reduction in our spend on residential care, which will do two things. It will reduce the cost of supporting those people, but it will also give a lot of those people a better chance in life in a supported living unit rather than in more institutionalised forms of care. The second part of your question, I think, was around Arlen Lodge and how can we say we're increasing capacity when half of it's gone over to children's. Arlen Lodge had something like about 34, 35 odd beds in it. For quite some time, some of those beds were decommissioned. And so for quite a few years, Arlen Lodge has been running a service based on 24 bedded capacity rather than about 34, 35. So part of the decommissioned service, you're quite correct, has gone over to children's services to support them in their resettlement of young people out of the city, actually. And the remaining beds that are left, we have switched a number of those over to being rehab beds. And where that's benefited from is that they will make sure they get enhanced clinical support in those beds. So there aren't more beds in terms of volume, but the way we're using the beds will help people return home more quickly, particularly around hospital discharge. We have, over the last few years, experienced a significant problem, particularly with people with dementia who have long hospital stays. When they then go into step-down accommodation, returning home is extremely difficult. And so we end up with high numbers of placements, particularly around our older population with dementia in residential and nursing care. The work we're trying to do at Arlen Lodge is to ensure that more of those people, when they were living at home with support from carers and home care, prior going into hospital, are able to go back home rather than then into long-term residential care.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I now move on to Councillor Thompson, please?
Sorry, I think I've been combining two things here, Chair, and I'm actually going to save my question for Councillor Williams on housing.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. I think you've all realised we're not going to have a 10-minute break because we won't finish. I apologise for that. But I now go to Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. I had a specific observation around the adult CQC inspection report and the issue around annual reviews within the Specialist Children's Disability Service being up to 30 months overdue. I'm sure there'll be information forthcoming from the local authority for families around that, because that, I feel, is needed. However, for the purpose of my point today, what we know with having such an overdue annual assessment is that there will be young people leaving full-time education who have high support needs within that group of young people, because see the Specialist Children's Disability Service is 0 to 25, so you've got the whole preparing for adulthood cohort. So it's kind of this correlation really and query / concern around how such lengthy overdue assessments and how the lack of information can inform budget savings lines and also commissioning. I've reached out to the adult commissioners to say, what data is being used for the recommissioning of adult day services. So I think I've made the point clear. If a 30-month overdue assessment period is not giving the council the information they need, and that concerns PAC and the community greatly.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I think, again, we'll be able to talk about that more next week. But if you'd like to give an answer now.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks for your question. I mean, you're right, your question is kind of more focused around CQC performance, which we can talk in more detail around on the 28th. But in terms of the budget question, I think probably first of all I'd like to clarify, in terms of our younger population of people with disabilities between 18 and 24, those assessments and reviews will be done by the Pod 2 team, which is effectively managed and delivered through Children's Services. The gaps in the adult social care reviews were really around the 25 plus team. So in terms of CQC performance, you're quite correct. When the Care Quality Commission looked at our review performance, it was as of November 24, so they first started coming to us last year. That was based on the learning disability performance of 29%. That was for the 25s and over. That's now increased already to 41%, but I feel I can talk to more detail in that next week. In terms of the budget, I think our work and our forecasting around the needs of young people between 18 and 24 is relatively accurate and relatively good in terms of engagement, but I can pick up the issues around kind of review performance and quality next week. I will just clarify that we have recognised our reviewing deficit. And again, in terms of that transformation money I referenced in my previous question, 684,000 transformation money was set aside last year for recruiting and delivering a dedicated review team. And that review team for adults has now been operational since January, well, since this month. So again, we're confident in terms of our future reviewing capacity that we'll have the capacity to keep on top of our reviews. And of course, if you can review people regularly, you can make sure the care they're receiving is of the right level and the right price to meet their needs.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to go to Councillor Shanks and then to Councillor Macleay, and then we will finish.
Thank you. Obviously, we're still waiting for the Adult Social Care National Funding solution, so that would be really good if we ever get that. Just in terms of brickfields, I mean, I was a bit involved at the beginning of this, and it was sold to us in the way that Steve's described it. This would be a saving, we would bring people back into the city. But it's coming to Cabinet on Thursday, which is public already, isn't it? Which is going for a 125-year lease on that property to an external provider, which I assumed that the council would be running it ourselves, and I would have thought there would be more savings from that, But also 125 years, I mean, how are we going to ensure that we do consistently meet those savings if we're signing something off that we've actually built as well? So I am concerned about that, which is coming to Cabinet. But anyway, as it's on this paper, I'm going to raise it here.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that?
Thanks, Councillor Shanks. Yes, in terms of brickfields, I mean, there are a number of reasons why we're not electing to run the service ourselves as an in-house service. Number one, if we have the contract for the delivery of that service will be a lease contract, and it will be with a registered provider. That already provides an avenue for greater income through things like housing benefit, rather than if we own the property as landlord ourselves. Secondly, delivering the care and support through a provider in our market will ensure that, number one, we have a more efficient way of delivering that service. And number two, we will have a really rigorous contract with that provider that we will make sure is of the right quality and of the right mode of delivery. I think the thing about brickfields is that it is going to be a specialist service. So it'll be a specialist service of working age adults with quite severe and profound disabilities. As an authority and as a care provider, we don't necessarily have the skills to best deliver that service. And so for a number of reasons, we are best off going out into the market and commissioning that from a provider that has those skills and has those abilities. And we will also ensure that that care has to be delivered more efficiently.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I now go to Councillor Macleay.
My question has been covered in a few different ways, so we can...
Okay. And as I said, plenty of opportunities to talk about more this next week, and I think we'll have more time then. So what I'm going to do is I think we have some recommendations at the end. So I'm now going to go to Councillor Robinson, who has asked if he can come up now. I think he has agreed with Councillor Allen that he can go before him. So do you want to come up and give yours, Councillor Robbins?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm sure if I can find my glasses, I've got them, we will be fairly quick on my section. The proposals going to Budget Council in February 26 relate to £100,000 saving in respect to libraries closure. These proposals were discussed at the People and Overview Scrutiny Committee on November the 10th, 2025, and the decision made at December Cabinet to close Hollandbury and Westdean libraries and make changes to the opening hours of both Jubilee and Hove libraries. So there are no new proposals. It's the saving that comes from the closure paper that went to Cabinet in December. But we're happy to answer any questions if there can be any.
Thank you very much, Councillor Robbins. And yeah, people may ask you about the library strategic review that's coming up, but I know it's not in this budget, but I anticipate that they might. So I'm now going to ask if anybody's got any questions of Councillor Robbins. Councillor McLeay, can you have some questions? Okay. Okay, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. Yes, libraries was covered at the previous People. There was a unanimous recommendation that came from this scrutiny committee to not close and to wait for that review, that there may be opportunities during that review that might be uncovered in terms of how these facilities could help maybe make the service and make the council money, but also help with savings in other parts where we think about how people within our community are isolated, how that impacts them from a social welfare perspective. So we were calling for more of that thinking to be done before we close those services. It's more of a comment, really. It's a shame that that recommendation was ignored, especially when so many of us agreed on that.
Yeah, I'll just make a point that we actually, we have seen that Rottingdean is going to be moving forward with various ideas. But Councillor Robbins, please.
Well, I'd just say that to say it was ignored isn't exactly true. It was discussed and decided that we couldn't go forward with that. But it wasn't ignored, it was discussed. And everything was laid out in Cabinet papers in December. So if you'd like to refer back to them, it will explain all the details. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and of course as scrutiny, all we can really do is put ideas forward. These don't have to be implemented. They're just, our thoughts about things that we would like Cabinet to look at, which they did. And I thank you very much, Councillor Robbins. You'll be very pleased. Does anybody want to say anything else? No. Okay. So I will allow you to make your way home or whatever. So, Councillor Allen, would you like to come forward? Councillor Allen, his portfolio is customer services and public realm, and has aspects covering both people and place. But for this committee, we are looking at community engagement, dear to all our hearts, I know, and customer services, again, very dear to all our hearts, I think. So do you want to speak to the committee? I'm sure you do. Of course you do.
I would love to. Thank you, Chair. So my portfolio covers both scrutiny committees, but the purview of the People Overview Scrutiny Committee covers customer service, so how the council as an organisation interacts with residents, businesses, visitors, third sector, community engagement and comms, HR and building services, and our resilience work, so responding to emergencies. When it comes to the council plan, the main area I cover when it comes to these competencies is looking to deliver a responsive and learning council with well-run services. So the savings for people and innovation include a mix of working smarter, such as more intelligent and economical use of our office accommodation space, and contract conciliation to deliver substantial savings for our facilities and buildings, while also undertaking reviews and redesigns across other central support services and teams. The proposals aim to transform People and Innovation Directorate into a strategic change delivery directorate that will contribute to the Council's overall priorities and transformation goals that aim to achieve a sustainable organisation that delivers for our communities and our staff. New innovative operating models, streamlined structures and rationalised core service offers across HR, organisational development, innovation and communications and engagement will reflect our council plan, Better Brighton Hove for All, the priorities within that, and our mission to be a learning organisation that's continuously improving from the corporate centre right to our frontline staff in terms of customer service. A lot of that is done through IT&D transformation, but that area is covered by Place Scrutiny Committee. But I'm happy to dive into that where relevant.
Thank you very much. It all sounds very wonderful. I have a feeling we'll be looking at the nuts and bolts and the actual reality of it on a daily basis, because I think that's where there have been some problems, which very much we would hope to see sorted by computers and so on, and I assume at some point AI. So I've got Sam who wishes to ask about this, and I have TJ, and I have Alison, and I have Ellen. Do I
clear which bits we're looking at here?
Yeah,
because
I can't find it.
There's quite a lot there that you said that could be in. Is which page it's on? Is it?
I will ask. Would you be sort of refer people to the bits you're talking about?
Exactly.
I agree. It has been a little bit confusing.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I mean the reason is because customer service cuts across everything. So I can't point you to a specific area, but just to reiterate, so that's customer service in general across the whole organisation, community engagement and the comms department, human resources and building services. So that's our portfolio we use for operational purposes, such as our 3 town halls, Bart's House, rather than our council house stock, our agricultural portfolio, things like that. And our resilience work, so responding to emergencies as they arise.
Right. Okay. Well, let's kind of head into that territory. Does it include?
And sorry, Chair, I completely failed to introduce Alan Steeden, the Director for People and Innovation.
Yes. Hello. Good to see you.
Sorry,
Good to see you.
Okay.
You have got a question. Now you know what we're talking about. Okay. Yes, it was much talk about innovation and so on. But yeah, I'm hoping council tax will come somewhere in this. But anyway, I'm going to go to Councillor Parrott.
I just wanted to say, following full council in December, that I'm hopeful that we can take to Cabinet the proposal that was made about becoming disability competent leader, which will impact, it's really a comment more than a question, but just to kind of reiterate it, obviously impact the way we are within ourselves as a council in terms of our staff, but obviously that will have huge impact, hopefully, as we extend that out to customer service and the way we interact with our residents. So, hopefully we'll start to see some significant even more improvements there in terms of the way we manage and work with people in all of those areas. And particularly just making sure that all of that is borne in mind, particularly around equalities, around any work we're looking at with digital transformation, and the use of that. We have to bear in mind the digitally excluded, thank you, the digitally excluded, and making sure that they're not left behind in any of that, and just making sure that we're doing that, and really improving the co-production work that we already do, and making sure that we're really focusing in on that.
Yeah, do you have comments on that?
Sure. There's a lot I could say around how we're being an accessible organisation, both for our staff and for residents trying to get in touch and utilise our over 700 services. But linking specifically to the budget is, even though we are investing substantial amounts of into digital innovation in order to especially address some of those demand-led services which are causing a lot of pressure on our budget, we aren't going to row back on having access to in-person support for those who need it, and that's been especially bore out in the work we've done over the last year of moving customer service into libraries, and in the next financial year moving housing support into Hove Town Hall. So there'll always be that in-person support for those who require it.
It's very important. Yeah, why did that? Is really important to people, actually. So I am now going to go to, I think I will go to Ellen. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi. Notes that I made about the segment around innovation was summary of proposal was the reduced capacity within information rights team, and that the delivery risk and impact was not currently meeting statutory duties. By reducing the budget, there's an increased risk of that the council remains non-compliant and that performance declines further due to increasing demand. And then there's another point where the reduced capacity within consumer feedback team, there is a delivery risk and impact that not currently meeting ombudsman expectations, some of which are statutory. By reducing the budget, there is an increased risk that the council remains non-compliant and that performance declines further due to increased demand. So my question is, these seem like a dangerous game in terms of not being compliant. When we're already not compliant, what are the risks in terms of fines?
It's a very good question. So the information rights team are already holding vacancies, and interestingly, since we took over administration, subject access requests and FOI requests have gone up exponentially. I think for subject access requests it's something like 70% increase. So the pressure on the team has increased. What we want to get to a situation of is where a customer has made a complaint about a service they've received, and ideally that is dealt with at stage 1 appropriately, rather than escalating through to stage 2 and ombudsman, which is where compensation can come in. So it's about honing that customer service at the front line so that we're getting it right first time and learning really proactively from those complaints and where customer service has not been where it should be. Anything to add, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely. So just in addition to that, we are looking at standing up some test and learn pilots, particularly in adult social care as well, just so we can have improved use of monitoring of subject access requests, freedom of information requests, be able to respond to them better. We do feel like this is an area in which increased technology, AI can help us digitise this, automate and streamline some of our business processes. It clearly is a really important ones. We must remain within the law. Information rights is the law, is what people have their right to. So it's something that we take very seriously. We'll be putting in place mitigations and plans around this as well, taking the learning from this and improving our processes where we can across the council.
Yeah, and being transparent. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I'm now going to go to Councillor Sheard. TJ.
Thank you, Chair. And just to make it clear for everyone involved, I have been involved in a lot of some of the technological rollout with Councillor Allen for the administration in this. So I am asking with a bit of knowledge, but I really want to kind of get to grips on the customer service side, because we've spoken briefly about those who are digitally excluded. There are a growing number of younger people who are suffering with loneliness, who their only contact to the outside world, the only way they're prepared to contact council services is through their computer on the side of their room. And can we make sure, whilst we've done great efforts decentralising customer services, so we're trying to put it into community so everyone can easily access it, that those who are more than likely only ever going to try and access it from their laptop, and if they can't, that's it, they're going to drop off the radar entirely. Can you make sure that the customer service team have the technology there and the support there, so they aren't just stuck talking to an AI, and they've actually got the help for the complex edge cases that running a city always brings up?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Sheard. I've been really clear from the start that whatever digital innovation we make in terms of customer service, including AI technology, it should not be a novelty, and it should have a really obvious, demonstrable rationale as to whether it is improving something at the front door for the customer, or whether it is releasing burden from officers' capacity. And so whether that's in any directorate from adult social care all the way to reporting the trees blown down in the road, that's what needs to be at the front and centre when we're delivering any of these new ideas and new technologies. But you're absolutely right as well that digital innovation is the most democratising and accessibility increasing thing in history, probably, that people can shoot off an email about their council tax problem and get a response in due course, rather than have to write down a letter, buy a stamp, walk to the post box, and then get a response. You can sit in the comfort of your own home on your phone now. So even though there are, of course, challenges for some people, which we respect and will do everything we can to mitigate and help. I helped a resident of mine get onto the electoral roll, and she didn't have an email or a mobile phone and was struggling to do that. And the electoral services team, which I also cover, was more than exemplary in helping that person who was digitally excluded, engage with that service. But yeah, anything to add?
Just broader agreement. Digital inclusion is also still remaining a priority, and let's just go back to an earlier thing around Councillor Parrott. So looking at all aspects of that, digital does have lots of ways that it can be even more an accessible channel for some people other than others. That's the nature of diversity. We look at all protected characteristics and build that into our systems, policies and processes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now go to Councillor Meadows. Thank you, Chair. Under the recommendations for the whole report, it talks about approving the extension of the Innovation Fund to 2930, committing 8.140 million. Why are we approving now, before Budget Council, something that could wait because it's not going to come in until 2930?
I'm sort of happy to take that. I mean, to be clear, nothing is yet approved until Budget Council. As you say, Budget Council is the only sovereign body that can approve the budget for the next year. What this is about is a couple of things. First of all, it's about looking at not just the year in front of us, but the medium-term financial position of the council. And secondly, it's about saying, as Councillor Allen has tried to draw out, how can you innovate so that you can do the same things or even better things at a lower cost base or in a more efficient way? One of the ways that we can try to do that is through the Innovation Fund, and the Innovation Fund is often about where we receive capital receipts, which we periodically do as a council, if we extend a long lease or if we dispose of an excess property, is taking that money and then investing it into the Innovation Fund, which we're allowed to do with the current parameters of flexible capital receipts. So what that is saying is about trying to set out over the next 3-4 years, what do we think are going to be the resources required to make the investments in IT and digital, other organisational changes to be more efficient, and doing that now, or at least signaling that strongly now, so that the organisation knows what it's got to work with over the coming years to improve the services of the council. But John, anything further than that?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much covers it. I think the important thing when we set the budget in February, we are statutorily, we need to set our budget for next year for 26/7, but actually it's really important as a council that we have a financial plan for a 4-year period or a longer period, because actually, as Jacob described, as Alan previously described, and both Jacobs have described, there are plenty of things that we would want to do to improve the efficiency of the council, which actually may take some time to actually deliver. You can't necessarily just flick a switch and suddenly things completely change. But actually, there's some things that we can invest in now that might have an effect in a year, in 2 years' time. So I think it's important that our financial strategy sets out how do we hope to become more efficient as a council over a 4-year period, and what is the investment required, rather than just looking at it on a year-by-year basis, where inevitably you end up looking at a much more short-term approach to how you set your budget.
Yeah. Just quickly, thank you for that, but you haven't answered why do we have to approve it today? It's in the recommendations that it's up for approval, 2.5, read your recommendations, it's up to approve. Why today, if we can wait for budget?
I don't think this committee can approve anything. This committee can only make recommendations.
No, it can't.
All it says is it notes the draft budget. It's the appendix that...
The recommendations, as far as I can see, are that the Overman Scrutiny notes the general fund draft budget and makes comments or recommendations on these proposals to Cabinet if it chooses to do so. I think sorry, that was a Cabinet approval. So that is the Cabinet paper in December.
Yeah.
Page 7. Page 7.
It's page 7 now, recommendation.
We're not talking about heaven, that's minutes, page 7.
So, I mean, I think hopefully a sort of answer, which is that what Council Managing Budget is the Cabinet paper that went in December, which now forms part of these papers, but this committee is not being asked to approve that. No. And the overall general fund and capital fund of the council will obviously be approved at Budget Council.
Yeah. Would have been helpful to have known that. Doesn't say anything in the report. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm now going to go to, excuse me, Sushan. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. I was interested to hear, I presume you were saying it was successful to move customer services to the libraries, because that is not what I've heard from the staff at the libraries. And the experience at Jubilee, particularly, when you walk into Jubilee now, it doesn't feel like a nice place to ask for help and support, because it's, it's got that tape at the side. And I know the staff in both there and Hove have, it's not their preferred, that isn't what they were originally set up to do, being librarians. So I suppose my general question, particularly with that and with changes to where staff work, presumably at Bartholomew's, the closing of Bath House, etc., how are we making sure that staff are coming with us on this? Because, that's a big change. And I understand there's not really necessarily enough space in Hove Town Hall for all the people that are going to be moved out of Bath. I don't know. I don't get the information on this. I just hear the rumours and occasionally staff complain. So I suppose, how much are the unions on board with this consultation, but also how are we going to make sure that the staff are happy? Because that's, happy staff do a good job, generally.
Yeah.
And could I just, before we turn to council, I think there's an important principle that we've discussed a fair amount in Labour Group, which is that it's actually incumbent on us to not have underutilised operational buildings, right? Like, all that represents is spending money, taxpayers' money, on things that don't need to be spent on. Now, of course, you've got to bring staff with you, but if you look at our state of the city, lots of buildings, both operational, commercial and otherwise, we've got to make sure they're utilised well. We don't want half-empty or three-quarters empty buildings. So that's sort of the driver behind looking at how do we best utilise our buildings, and obviously by freeing up part of Bart's House, you now have options to get income for the council, which is good for taxpayers and good for residents. I mean, my quick aside on Jubilee Library is that Councillor Shanks might have a point in that the taped off area perhaps doesn't look brilliant. And maybe that's something that was an observation I made when I was at the library this weekend. So perhaps that's something to look at. I think overall, and Councillor Allen can come in, overall I think residents are probably okay with going to Jubilee Library to access services, but obviously the staff point is important.
Absolutely. Well, on the staff point, I would challenge Councillor Shanks' statement that it's not what they're meant to do. We have not had to change anyone's employment contract in doing this. A librarian has always had the expectation that if a resident came with them saying, you know, I really need help with my council tax, that as part of Brighton and Hove City Council, a library officer is expected to help that resident with that query, and whether it's challenging a parking fine or registering to vote or any other access to service that they might require. You know, there has been a journey on getting library officers confident to be able to answer some of those questions, and even where they haven't known, you know, oh, is this the right tax code for this resident? You know, we want to build up their confidence that they know who the right person to ask is, so that we never have the situation that they say, I don't know, you'll have to ask someone else, and find out on their own. But anything else to say on that? Sorry, I'm going to scratch that back. The one other thing, building on Councillor Taylor's point, is even ignoring the hopefully quite useful capital receipt that we would gain from releasing Bartholomew House and bringing more staff into the other operational assets we already own, like Hove Town Hall, perhaps Brighton Town Hall. Just from stopping using that building, we make a £300,000 savings, which is a really significant impact on our overall budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Shanks, for that question. There has been a lot of learning from the move from customer services to libraries. And part of our approach to innovation and transformation at the council is that every time we undertake an activity like this, we generally do learn. We learn with the people that receive the service. We learn from the people that have been part of that. And that has actually helped to shape this workspace innovation approach in terms of moving staff from Bart's House to Hove Town Hall. The data shows that there will be capacity and there is space for those staff and teams to move here. It is going to be a change. We recognise that. We want to do that with staff. We are doing a whole range of tours, walking tours. My video welcoming new staff who have not been part of this building to Hove Town Hall was published about an hour ago. We have been doing a pulse survey to understand what staff priorities from the look and feel and the future shape and design of this. We are standing up a pilot project in the area just in the ground floor there as well. We really, really do want to do something that has a change with staff, while recognising that when you do have to up and you've been working in a certain building for years and years, then that is an upheaval, and we recognise that for staff. So there's going to be a factor around well-being and making sure this is co-created change with the people and staff that have been part of that. Our new homeless help centre is a trauma-informed design. We've been working really closely, collaboratively with other services to make sure that this is a building that's a good hub that the council can be proud of. So the council, as a civic leader, public service provider and employer, is making sure that's factored into the design. We're not going to get it right completely. That's why we're going to continue to learn from staff as we go through these moves as well over the next 6 months to make sure that we can make the tweaks, the adjustments and the iteration that we need to do as part of this.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to go to Alison Thompson for her question.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, you mentioned, Councillor Allen, about resilience earlier, resilience preparedness. Would you be able to tell us a bit about the investment that you are...
Yes, does everyone feel reassured that I'm in charge of emergencies? Under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, the Council has statutory duty to respond to and coordinate different public services, so fire and rescue, police, you know, the whole list of those kind of people when emergencies happen. I'm thinking back to the last month when all that scaffolding came down on First Avenue in Hove. That triggered our resilience capacity. Also, the containers as another example, metal containers washing up on the sea. More historically, bigger things like the Royal Albion fire in your ward, Councillor Thompson, is a more significant example of that. So in order to keep up to date with our really important statutory duties in this area, in this budget we're proposing an investment of £150,000.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Allen. That was very interesting. I think
I have a quick question on the Royal Albion
move
costs.
on to Councillor
Is it your department that the Royal Albion costs come out of, please?
No, Councillor Meadows, that isn't for now. We can do it. I think what it's made me realise, I'm sure somebody can tell you at the end of the meeting, is actually this is an area that we really don't get to look at that much. And I think I would quite like to deepen the understanding of this committee about it. So I don't know if some of you might like it to be on the agenda, a future point, because it raises a lot of issues about community, about older people, about young vulnerable people and so on. And generally people I have that write to me who are incredibly frustrated because they can't get a response from, say, council tax, or it's very difficult for them to upload stuff for their parking, permit and so on. These are all the kind of issues that we deal with as councillors, which drive us actually slightly round the bend. And so I think we would perhaps quite like to ask you back to talk about this, because I feel we need to shed a lot more light on this area that you're doing. And I know you're so enthusiastic about it, Councillor Allen, so it'd be fantastic. So thank you so much for coming today and for answering questions to both of you. Really appreciate it. So I'm now going to ask Councillor Williams to come up and talk to us. And she is going to talk to us about the, what's on here, about her area, which actually really is looking on homelessness services and housing needs services. So I will ask you. Hello.
Thank you, Chair. Now, the budget setting proposals for housing are set against a backdrop of increased demand for housing and homelessness services, both in scale and in complexity. We have an in-year forecast overspend of £5 million for temporary accommodation, and that's meant that we've had to make some rather difficult decisions to ensure that we continue to meet in the most financially sustainable way the needs for our support. The challenges faced locally must also be understood within the context of the ongoing national crisis. And this continues to place immense strain on local authorities across the country, not just ours. But some councils are further advanced in feeling the effects of these pressures, particularly when it comes to the availability and cost of temporary accommodation. And Brighton and Hove stands out due to its unique set of circumstances. The city experiences not only the heightened demand and complex needs typically seen in coastal towns, but also the acute supply constraints and elevated costs associated with a very popular and global city. This combination creates a perfect storm, intensifying the pressures on our housing services and making it even more challenging to secure suitable and affordable accommodation for those in need. We are increasingly supporting households with multiple needs, often requiring intense wraparound responses. At the same time, the supply of suitable of temporary and settled accommodation remains insufficient, and the cost of securing that supply has escalated sharply right across the region. These structural pressures, demand, availability and cost, are driving substantial financial challenges for the service and for the council. For 26-27, the 12 million service pressures for homelessness reflect these realities. incorporating the rising costs of temporary accommodation, longer placement duration, and the increasing difficulty of achieving timely move on into appropriate housing. Our saving proposals of £5 million for that period respond to these challenges through a clear and disciplined set of principles and protect outcomes for residents at the same time, which is so important. And this results in a net investment for the service of £7 million. At the core of these principles are early intervention and prevention, ensuring resources are focused on avoiding crisis rather than responding to it, reducing reliance on high-cost emergency accommodation by increasing access to more stable and a better value supply, use of data, intelligence and digital tools to identify households at risk of homelessness earlier, enabling targeted and proactive support is really important in this, and securing value for money through commissioning and procurement, including more consistent use of spot purchase arrangements and longer-term contracts to stabilise the prices and costs. We're already seeing the impact of targeted initiatives that align with these principles. The direct award of spot purchase arrangements has improved market stability in this area, providing a more predictable pricing for those 200 households. And ultimately, these households are in good quality homes, whilst their longer-term housing needs are being addressed. In response to the increased level of demand, we continue to improve our prevention work. And so far, this year, 2,465 households have approached us about homelessness and about their problems. The same period last year, and we thought that was high, 2,092 households were prevented, though, 416 from homelessness. And we have this year prevented 534 households from becoming homeless. But you can see how huge and acute this issue is. This is not manufactured. It's because we're not doing our best. It's because of the sheer numbers of people in our city coming to us for help with potential or actual homelessness. It is acute. Now, importantly, these initiatives are not only delivering immediate impact, they also inform the Council's medium-term financial strategy for 27-28 and onwards. These measures form a coherent and a long-term response to the pressures we face, grounded very much in prevention. This is so important. Improving supply arrangements and much smarter use of data in the future, ensuring we can continue to deliver effective services while meeting the financial challenges of today and, I dare say, those of the future. And I'm joined by officers, particularly Harry, who knows everything about everything, to help to answer your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Williams. And indeed, there's a lot of very positive stuff. So, I hope people will ask some questions about this, but I think we're all pleased to see this emphasis on this particular issue. So, who I can see? Ellen. Okay, so that's 3. And Julie. Okay, so I will start with you, Ellen.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. So it's clear we're in a difficult position financially, and that's highlighted by the recent announcement about prioritising council housing as temporary accommodation rather than for those on the waiting list. Obviously, this will impact those who are on the waiting list. I know one individual, for example, who's been waiting over a decade. She's sleeping on the floor while her children are in the bed. And, this has been a 14-year wait for her. So that really will erode her hopes in ever moving in that situation changing. On page 111, I'm really interested in that proposed 5 million saving for TA. That in that segment there is your list. I think you've suggested there are principles. But it'd be really great to get more detail on how that breaks down in terms of the numbers. Are you able to share some more specifics on what the financials are for those items?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McLean. And we're going to have fairly brief answers, I'm afraid.
Harry's going to talk about the difficult financial part because he knows I can't add up.
Thank you, Harry.
But on your point about we are pausing for 3 months, this is really in response to an acute need. We have so many families who cannot be accommodated sufficiently that this is a response to an acute need. No family should be, living like that. But unfortunately, we've had to do this to help those particular families because the effects of living in insecure temporary accommodation on children, as we know, this is well documented. So this is a response, and this is going to affect 80-ish voids, and it is a very temporary measure. So with much sympathy, if anybody is waiting on the list, is probably already in temporary accommodation in some sort. What I can say, though, is we are building hundreds more, but they take time to build. And our buyback, can I announce almost at 500?
Pre-announce it.
Go on. I can say our buyback scheme, which has been going for a few years, we are just about to approach our 500th buyback. We're not quite there, but we're nearly there, aren't we? So whilst we are just having to do this just really for this moment in time, the future, I hope, is looking much brighter for people waiting. Thank you.
Excellent.
And just very quickly, I know we're short on time, I think it's a really important point as to what the council, what Jill and the team and what we're all trying to do is you've got this short-term, we hope, issue, as Jill has said, on temporary accommodation. What needs to happen in this city and in this country is we need to rotate into more social housing, and now's the time to do it because we know that we've heard that landlords are leaving the market. We want to buy those properties. We want to buy that stock off landlords and bring it into social housing ownership, which will make the overall city more affordable and will clearly get people out of temporary accommodation or precarious private rented accommodation into more secured social accommodation. So that's the overall strategy. We've just got to do it as quickly as possible, which, as Jill says, can be challenging in terms of the new build, but on the buying, we're going as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, thank you for that extra. Harry?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. It's good to see everybody again. I know I've been here recently to talk about homelessness and our sleeping strategy. And that's really important because we're looking at the next 5 years alongside our homelessness and our sleeping strategy and about how we can effectively transform our services to provide much better outcomes for people experiencing homelessness and sleeping in the city whilst becoming financially sustainable. And just to talk specifically about the allocation of those savings, I think it's important just to first of all just explain a little bit about how we're going about trying to achieve that objective of being financially sustainable. So we're looking at it in 3 ways. We want to improve our effectiveness in preventing homelessness. So that means that we are getting to people earlier on before they even experience homelessness so that we can have much cheaper interventions and reduce the cost to local authority, but also provide much better outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. We know that we're a very good authority at preventing homelessness when we capture it. What we are really focusing in on is about how we get to people earlier. And there's lots of investment that we're making in our proposals, including an additional what we call a housing advice team to give people that advice and support that they need even before they experience that statutory homelessness, but also looking at digital and innovation tools like predictive analytics, for example, to see how we can get in early as possible. What we also really hear and recognise is that some of the quality and standard of our temporary accommodation doesn't meet the expectations of our residents, of our partners, and we really want to improve the quality of the accommodation that we provide. Over the next 5 years or so, we're really looking at how we can effectively transform our housing stock to provide better quality homes that are more affordable to the local authority. Councillor Williams has talked about the investment that we're making in buying new homes. That includes homes for settled accommodation, and we're on target to buy 100 additional homes this financial year, but also includes temporary accommodation homes so that people have better quality homes, temporary homes, when they experience homelessness. We're also trying to get into better contracts, better arrangements with some of our private providers to ensure that longer term financial sustainability and also sustainability for people using those homes. We're also working with some of our local registered providers as well to look at opportunities to see if we can partner together to provide better quality homes and greater levels of support. So in our proposals, we have about 3.5 million associated to our temporary accommodation and how we effectively provide a new model of accommodation over the coming years. And then the final thing that we're really looking at is trying to improve
what we call our move on into settled homes. So people who have gone through our homelessness system are living in temporary homes, moving into settled accommodation, and what we can do there to support that process and get people finally into a settled home. So our budget proposals for the financial year are based on those key themes, and they interplay and connect with our homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. Again, our objective is to provide a better quality service for people experiencing homelessness and rough sleeping, at the same time put in the foundations in the next financial year to help us build a financially sustainable model over the medium-term financial plan so that we can really help address both challenges.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Harry. I'm now going to go to Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Really interesting. I think I'm right in saying that the cost of temporary accommodation have gone up by about 25% in the past year. Is that right? Across sort of nationally. So I'm pleased that we're continuing our commitment to buy back council houses and building our own council-owned properties. I know also we just announced the initiative to use council accommodation for homeless households, which is to be applauded. But obviously, we've already pointed out that hopefully that will stay short-term, because obviously the impact on people who are on the list. I suppose my question is, what can we do to take on these private landlords? Because I just feel like they're making huge profits from supplying us with temporary accommodation. Is there more pressure that we can apply to them? And can I ask what the national government might be able to do to help? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask that we have fairly short answers, because we're really, really tight on time now.
So before Harry gives you more detail, it's really bringing the temporary and emergency accommodation in-house for us to manage, because it's much easier for us to manage our own rather than relying on private. Some are very good, but some maybe not so quite so cooperative with standards. So if we have more control over the conditions and standards, the better for the people that are living in them.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for the question. So I think it's really important to note that the private sector have a really important role to play in addressing homelessness. We know from our data that one of the biggest causes of homelessness is some renting privately, but it's also one of the greatest solutions for people experiencing homelessness and accessing settled homes. So it's always a balance. And I think for me, it's about balancing regulation, so licensing schemes, for example, how we've got effective selective licensing schemes within the city, but also support and partnership working with some of our landlords. And we do have some good private accommodation providers, and what we're going to be doing over the medium-term financial plan in next financial year is about really working with those that are meeting our standards, so that we're doing that market shaping to make sure that all of our providers are meeting the standards that we expect.
Thank you very much, Harry. And I go to Councillor Meadows. Thank you, Chair. On page 44, it's talking about the summary of your budget savings here. It talks about the full cost recovery, maximising full cost recovery for temporary accommodation costs. We all know how high the costs are in city as opposed to what any government gives the person for housing. How are you going to implement that and get that recovery back?
Thank you, Councillor. Really good question. So the rate that what we can get back from temporary accommodation is fixed by something called housing benefit and what we call the local housing allowance. What we understand is where properties that we own as an organisation, as a landlord, and properties that we lease on a longer term basis, we're able to increase the level of housing benefit that we're able to access from that property. So effectively what we're doing is just changing the way that we assess claims for housing benefit and say, actually, this is a longer term property for us, and therefore we can increase the rents that come through from housing benefit from that particular property.
Thank you. Thank you. I now go to Councillor Sheard.
Thank you, Chair. In your budget savings proposals, you've named 4 areas that you're going to focus the budget savings on. That increasing supply of cheaper TA, the full cost recovery that Councillor Meadows was just touching on, the further improvement of effectiveness, and accelerating the move on into stable accommodation again. I was just wondering, because those are 4 very different lines to be taking, what's kind of the balance between each of them? And as Councillor Taylor's probably tired of hearing me ask this evening, what is the risk, especially with the increasing of supply, what is the risk of that budget being realised within year?
Thank you, Councillor. I think
we are operating in a very challenging climate, and Councillor Williams articulated a little bit about that increasing demand on services and that increasing complexity of need. There are legislative changes coming down the line, things like Renters Reform Act and other pieces of legislation that means that demand on homelessness services will remain unpredictable in the future. Mm-hmm. In terms of that focus for the first couple of years or so is really about providing or building a sustainable temporary accommodation provision and using the measures that I've outlined before. Later on, over the next 5 years or so, looking at how we can increase our prevention activity and reduce the cost and demand on the services, and then therefore the cost that we have on our homelessness services.
Thank you very much. And I now go to Councillor Shanks. Be quick.
Yes, I mean, I just heard something that slightly I'm confused now. I was told earlier in the response to a question about Breckfields that the reason to lease it out was because external providers can get the housing benefit extra money, which I've always understood, and we've tried to we argued about that in Parliament, I think. You've now told me that actually we can do it if we lease our properties. So anyway, I mean, my question really was going to be, well, you've just said that. I thought that now it's better for us to have longer term properties because we can get the extra money from the housing benefit. Anyway, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The other thing I was going to ask you about was, it does seem like this is a change in the allocations policy, albeit a temporary one, and in that case, do we not need to have consulted tenants? I mean, I don't know whether you've had feedback from existing or people on the housing list, but I can imagine that there will be some concern about this, so there obviously we need to get people into decent homes.
It is a very, very short term. It isn't going to be long term. It is for 3 months. So I think that's the issue here. And it's not that we want to take the chances away from tenants, but this is a measure that we've had to take because there are so many people in need. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And we really recognise the impact that it will have on households on the waiting list. We anticipate it will be about a 3-month delay for people bidding, missing the opportunity to bid. There are still properties for people to bid on, so our housing association homes, for example, our seniors housing, people can still bid on those properties, but completely recognise the impact that it will have. The urgency around the decision is the Council's financial sustainability and the need to achieve in-year savings, and we will be consulting on the proposals, and residents and members will have the opportunity to have their say, and we aim to launch consultation around the middle of February.
Thank you very much.
The leasehold issue, or the...
Yeah, you gave me another question. Sorry, I will have to move on. Sorry, this is. I can now go to Sam, please. Sam Parrott. Did you have a question, or was it? Yeah, it was Julie Cattell. The last question.
Thank you, Chair. Just incidentally, I was looking at the planning weekly list, and the application for the slipper baths has just gone in, which is temporary accommodation, so that's good news. I just wonder what the Greenwich model is in reducing the cost of existing temporary accommodation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So just for clarity, that's where we can look to apply what we call that standard local housing allowance on properties that we either own or lease on a longer term basis. At the moment, we have a much lower level of local housing allowance through housing benefit income per property, but we found that we can apply that standard rate, which is more per night, for properties that we own on a longer term basis, and that either we own or we lease. So that's what I was referring to earlier.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to just very briefly, given Councillor Shanks has asked about it, and it is complex, and I've gone through my understanding of it, including how you can treat charities versus registered providers. I wonder whether just a short briefing note for all councillors as we approach the budget on the treatment of housing benefit to try and...
Yeah, no, very helpful. Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Yeah, I'm sorry we're so pushed here. I think now that is all the questions, and what I'm going to do is in a minute I'm going to do the recommendations, but we also have we're going to note and then look at the recommendations that have come forward. So I know that people have to attend the next committee, so please all of the councillors and officers, please feel you can go now, and we will just do that as a committee. We will note and we will see what recommendations there are. If anybody's desperate to stay, they can. But I think, seeing as you've got another meeting at 5, you're quite challenged. Right, okay. Well, I think what we have is we have recommendations and it's 2.1, but it's actually two things. Yeah, please feel free. Please feel free to go. I'm not the mayor. You can go when I'm speaking. Did Sam manage to do anything? Yeah. Great. Right, I'm just going to give 5 minutes, because I know very kindly Giles agreed that we could just have a few minutes to look at the recommendations, to think about them, discuss them, and see how we want to vote on them. If the non-voting members wish to leave now, you're obviously free to do so. And I thank you very much for your contribution today. Yes, we will be putting it forward. It's obviously, we can only put it forward as a kind of suggestion, not as a recommendation, because, yes? Is that okay with you, Sarah? Yeah. Yeah, don't worry, we'll get it through. So if you want to talk amongst yourselves about those recommendations that are here on the sheet and how you wish to vote for them, I think they're mostly pretty sensible.
I'm not sure if you're going to be following the running order, but this one.
Looking at the recommendations, and we'll vote on them quickly now. Is Teresa coming back, or is she? She's there. Oh, right. Oh, there you are, Teresa. Sorry, trying to look around the room. Okay, so can we agree to note the general fund draft? Because that is part of the recommendations that we're doing, and we are noting it. Yeah. Councillor Meadows.
Just to say, the Conservatives never agree anything pre-budget.
Right.
So
okay.
I won't even agree to note. We note it or we don't note it.
Okay. So it's just a minor matter of words. So we're noting the general fund. We're noting it. We don't agree to note it. So we're noting it, that's fine. So with regard now to the recommendations, we have the first one, that the public health budget be examined with all information about the grant and what it can be used for at an additional scrutiny meeting, proposed by Councillor Shanks. I won't make a comment on that, but I think we were all very interested in looking at the public health budget. Councillor Meadows.
Considering we have another meeting next week, wouldn't it be better for these recommendations to go forward to the next meeting rather than today's
Well, next week isn't about this, it's about adult social care. So can we just vote on it? Do we agree with this? Yes, because I think we've all agreed in the meeting anyway. We all vote. Who is chair?
Before we vote.
Yeah, as much as I think this is a good idea, would this not be more well suited to go in front of HOSC than us as a agenda item?
Well, I think. Pardon?
I can explain that.
Okay, John can explain that. Not really. Yeah.
No, it wouldn't, because Council Public Health Services are reserved to this committee, not to HOSC, so in the Council's constitution.
Thank you, Giles, for the clarification. Okay, so do we agree on this recommendation? Yes. Councillor Meadows, are you abstaining or against? Your Councillor Meadows is abstaining. Okay, and 2, that a full account of consultations with unions and community groups be brought to this meeting or a future scrutiny. Proposed by Councillor Shanks, and I think this was raised in the meeting, about the importance of discussing with unions what this means.
I mean, it was a follow-up really to a recommendation that we made that I proposed at the last scrutiny, which was that we had an early draft of the budget, talk to community groups about an early draft, and I just wanted to make sure that was been happening. So that's
okay. So are we going to vote for that? Yeah.
Just wanted to ask a question, Chair, because I thought that the point of the scrutiny was that these people are part of the discussion, that unions and community groups come to this meeting. I don't understand.
No.
Why
some of the community, they've obviously talked with a wider group of community groups and the unions, because there might be some job losses and so on. I don't know if people want to vote for that one. Let me know if you do. So who wants to vote for this recommendation? Okay, so we have 2 votes. 1, 2, we have 5 votes for. Who? And Meadows is abstention. Okay, so abstention. Because we're so busy. Okay. And 3, that People O&S Committee agrees to use its scheduled meetings to scrutinise the earliest opportunity adult social care improvement planning, with a specific focus on the successful implementation and delivery of supporting people to successfully live in their own homes and as part of the wider community. I think we can probably move this to next week, can't we? Would people we can still vote on it, because I think we would all agree with this very much. Yes? Councillor Meadows, you abstain. Okay. And so, because I think, please let's look at it. And 5,
this could be part of the works programme. You know you have a programme, though you plan
Councillor Meadows, let's not discuss that now. It's what people are looking at. Right. 4, People O&S Committee recommends the final budget papers include details of the council engagement with the Treasury and with the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government regarding the financial settlement for Brighton and Hove, with specific focus on funding for housing and homelessness. I think there were quite a lot of details in the actual budget papers that I read, to be honest, and it was fairly comprehensive. I mean, I don't know how much more people want. I think Councillor Taylor was very clear in the discussions that were held and why there were these differences. But let's go ahead and vote on this one. So who is for this particular recommendation? So I have Councillor Shanks and I have Councillor Maclay. And yes, so I have everybody, but I'm assuming you are abstaining. So yes, so everyone. Okay, so we can ask for a bit more information on that. A sort of more details would help everybody. So thank you, everybody. I did say there might be 10 minutes at the end for the recommendation. Thank you for bearing with this. It was very tight. You've all been great. Well done.